Welcome back. Today we're going to make a single crust pie crust. This is probably going to be one of the most difficult labs that you do all semester, but as long as you pay attention and go slowly, you'll do great. So just so that you know, for in class, we'll have one day that we make single crust pies, and then after you get that perfected, we're going to work on a double crust pie, and that's what your fruit pies will be. So today we're just going to make a single crust pie, and I'm going to show you not only how to make the dough, but also roll it out, get it in your pie plate, and crimp the edges so that it's ready to pre-bake before you put in any filling that you might for a single crust pie. Okay, so we'll get the camera down here so that you can see what's going on in the bowl. Okay, so in my bowl, I have 1 1/4 cups of flour and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Now, I'm going to use this for kind of a savory pie here in a little bit. I'm going to make my family some quiche for lunch, so I'm not going to add any sugar. But if I was making a cream pie or something like that, I might add a tablespoon or 2 of sugar to the flour mixture. Okay, so I have my flour and my salt. I've just kind of tossed that around and gotten it mixed together. Our next task then is going to be to cut in the shortening. So I'm not sure if you can see my measuring here, but my little plunger, I have 1/3 cup of Crisco. And remember that when you pack your shortening or measure your shortening, you need to pack it into your measuring cup, try to get rid of all those air bubbles and level it off. Okay, now at school, please make sure that you wash your measuring cups really well. That shortening gets in everywhere. So if you need to get your veggie brushes out to scrub, feel free. Hot water and soap are going to be your best friend. So we're going to cut this shortening into our flour mixture. So I'm just going to push it, get it down in there, and use my favorite pastry blender to cut this into little pea-sized pieces. So hopefully you can see what I'm doing, and if it just sticks to your pastry blender, take your scraper and scrape it off. So I'm just rocking this back and forth, trying to get little pieces of shortening mixed in with the flour. Be patient, might take a little while. Now, every so often, check your pastry blender, see if you need to get your scraper out and clean it off. We want this fat as evenly distributed into the flour as we possibly can. When this bakes, the water and this fat, the water is going to create steam and the fat is going to make little flaky layers in your pastry, and that's what you want. You don't want a tough dough, you want it to be nice and flaky. Okay, so I'm getting to the point where I'm pretty close here. Just a second, I'll stop so that you can see what it looks like. Now at this point, we don't have to really worry about the flour being overworked. If you'll recall from our bread lab, we talked about it's when you add the liquid to the flour mixture that gluten starts being formed. So we don't have to worry about that with pastry. At this point, it's just fat and flour and a little bit of salt. So can you see down in there, see what it looks like? So evenly distributed, kind of like wet sand. That's what we have going on right now. Okay, so our next step, we're going to start slowly adding some cold water into the mix. In my water, I have a measuring cup with some ice, and the recipe calls for 4 to 5 tablespoons of cold water. But here's the thing, just like with your yeast spread dough, it depends on the humidity level of the weather in terms of how much water we really need to add. So I'm going to add 3 to begin with, fluff it up and mix it with my fork, and we'll see how much more I need to add after that. Okay, so We're gonna add, and try not to get the ice cube in there. So there's one. There's two, and actually I think I'm gonna fluff that around with my fork right now and see how it comes together. If you add too much water, you will have a tough dough, and we don't want that. All right, let's add a third one. So this is tablespoon number 3. Okay, so if you can see down in here, it's really starting to come together. It's kind of humid today, so only after 3 tablespoons, it looks like we have a pretty good dough here to roll out. So I'm going to stop with 3. See how if I push it up against the side of the bowl, we make kind of a ball. That's what we want. Okay, so I'm going to move my stuff out of the way, and we're going to start rolling this out so that it fits into our pie plate. Now what you want to do first is get a little bit of flour on your board. All right, now we just want enough so that it doesn't stick when you go to roll it out. Okay, so let's see how we do here. This is where I get nervous. Okay, so I'm going to make sort of a little disc here. I'm not really working it. And I'm going to add a little bit of flour to the top and a little bit on my rolling pin too, since I don't want it to stick. Okay, now go slowly. So we just do a little roll and then I turn it a quarter. Little roll and turn it a quarter. Reason that I only do a little bit at a time is that I want to make sure that it stays kind of circular in a disc, but then I also want to make sure that we're not sticking to our countertop. Okay, so you can see, might need to put just a little bit underneath, but it's not sticking, so we're doing great. Okay, so after I get it about 8 inches or so, then I'm going to start rolling it out a little bit more aggressively. Okay. Now we want this even. And notice that when I use my rolling pin, and this is even if I have a rolling pin with handles, I don't really use the handles. I kind of put my hands instead in the middle of the rolling pin because I really like to feel what's going on. Okay. And I like my pie crust to be on the thin side. I'm not a real fan of big chunky crusts. So I'm just going to go slowly, get it even, try to keep it as round as possible because that's going to make life easier here in a little bit. Okay, now once you get to a certain size, if you want to, take your pie plate and just for measuring sake, put it on and see where you are. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I think I'm going to roll it just a little bit thinner, just a little bit bigger, because that will make my life easier when I go to transfer. So let's roll this out just a little bit more here. A little bit more here on these edges. Okay, so to me that looks like it's pretty even. And I know that since it's a little bit bigger now than my pie plate, things are going to be good for me. All right, now you have a couple of ways in which to transfer this into your pie plate. One, we could have rolled this out between 2 pieces of waxed paper. You take one piece off, pick it up, flop it over, and put it in your pie plate. That's one way. Another way, we could have folded this in half and then fold it into a quarter and pick it up and put it in your pie plate. That works too. My favorite is to put it on my rolling pin and to transfer it because I feel like that gives me a little bit more control. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to wrap the dough over my my rolling pin and slowly roll it up. Now I'm not mashing it down because I don't want my layers to stick together. But I'm slowly rolling to make sure that I have everything. Okay, so I move my rolling pin and my pan back and slowly roll it back down. All right, perfect. Now we don't want to smash this down into our pie plate because we don't want the dough to shrink. So I like to pick it up just a little bit and let the weight of the dough, let it sink down into our pie plate, okay? Now, if we had a mistake, if something tore, it's very, very easy to fix. Notice all this extra dough, and here I'm gonna trim it in just a little bit. If we had a crack, you just take a little bit of your extra dough, pat some of your icy water that you have left on the dough, and then patch it. So it's very, very easy in case you have any problems. Okay, so I have this dough down in the pan. It's down in all of the corners, so it's time to trim. So I use my kitchen shears for this, and notice where the edge of the pie plate is. I'm gonna go about 1/2 inch past that and trim all the way around. And I'll show you in just a minute why I do that. Okay, so try to make it even. And just snip here or there. And if it's not perfect, it's not a big deal. What you're doing is making a nice lip that you can crimp. And this is what makes pies pretty after they're baked. So we're just trying to take off any uneven sides. There's a little bit too much there, so we'll cut that off. And I think that's pretty good. All right, next task then. You're gonna take the dough, that extra, and you're gonna, I don't know, hopefully you can see this. I'm folding it under so that it goes along the rim of your pie plate, okay? So I'll turn the plate as I go so that you can see what I'm doing. And I am gonna have a mess on the bottom of my pie plate here when I get done. So before I put this in the oven, I wanna make sure that I wipe that off. Okay, so you can see my pretty little edge there. Turning over. And I just pat it down a little bit just to make sure that we're even as I go around. Some places might be a little thinner than others simply because of how it got rolled out. That's not a big deal. Just try to get it as even as you possibly can. Okay, so can we see that? The edges are all even, and now it's time to do some pretty stuff. So if you wanted to start out, if you weren't sure how to do a crimp, you could just take your fork and crimp around the edge, all the way around. That's fine. I like to use my thumb of my left hand and my thumb and first finger of my right hand, and I go around and I push down with my left hand and push in with my right hand. So let's see if you can see what I'm doing. So I'm pushing down with my left thumb and in with my right hand, okay? So right here, and then this kind of measures. So I'm staying the same distance all the way around. Some people, they can do a rope and they can take hold and twist and do all kinds of fancy stuff that way. This is what I found to be easiest. So there, all right? So that looks pretty good. Now, if I wanted to put something in this, if I was gonna make, let's say, a pumpkin pie, so that's a single crust pie, but you do not pre-bake the crust. So I would put the pie filling in here like this and bake it. But because of what I'm going to use this for, and even if you made like a chocolate cream pie or something like that, you need to poke holes with a fork in the crust so that we don't have air bubbles that bubble up and cause the crust to rise out of the pan so you don't have room for your pie filling. So what I'm gonna do I'm going to take my fork and I'm going to prick the crust on the bottom. Now it doesn't have to be perfect, nobody's going to see this, but it's just so that we let steam out. Okay, so can you see that all right? All those little holes. So after I do the bottom, then I'm just going to go around the sides and do a few pokes here and there. So if it's even, great. If it's not, no big deal. Okay, so now that we have done our pricking, I can bake this, and I'm going to stick it in a really hot oven, 425, and I'm going to bake it for 8 or so minutes. Look to see if it looks golden brown and delicious, and then it'll come out. Before we put a cream filling in it, it needs to cool. Because I'm making a quiche, that's something that's going to be baked in the pie crust, and so it needs to be a hot crust that I add the filling to. All right, so this is a single crust pie. I'm sure that you'll do great for your lab. For your double crust pie lab, it will basically be the same thing, except you're going to make double the amount of dough to begin with, divide it in half, roll out both halves, and then before you put the top on the pie, so we'll get the bottom crust in, you'll put your pie filling. You'll want to put some water around the lip of the pie, all right, that edge. Then you'll do your trimming on both pieces, the top and the bottom crust, and turn it under and crimp. Okay, so it's a little bit more involved on that double crust pie, but we'll practice with the single crust and you'll do great. So thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing what you accomplish on your pies in class.